So inside here, you'll see there are two platforms. This silver one is where we pre-wet your tips. They come packed in dry sucrose, and that needs to be diffused off, so they'll spend at least 10 minutes in your buffer, the ones we're going to use. The experiment plate will sit here. This is at an angle to reduce light reflection, and it's at 30 degrees to keep temperature constant. It's going to be rotating at 1,000 RPM during the experiment, so that diffusion isn't limiting. The business part of this robot is right here. You can see there are 8 little hubs sticking down, 8 little ports sticking down, and each one has a spectrometer. White light is going to be going through the tips, and it's going to be measuring what comes on as your binding occurs. So that's the good thing to remember. That arm is going to come over, pick up your tips that are pre-wet, and it's going to walk them up and down your experiment plate, depending on what you tell it to do. I recommend in the future, when you get to filling up these plates or doing 8 at once, you make a plate map. You write it down. A lot of people do that either on their laptop or on a piece of paper. But let's, if that sounds like the right number of tips, let's get 4 tips pre-wetting, or I call it marinating, okay? That act of wetting tips happens in one of these empty tip trays. If you grab one of these, what you're going to do with one of these plates, we always orient them with A1 in the upper left-hand corner. You're just going to put 200 microliters of buffer in the first 4 wells of column 1. And tips are all here. Everything you need should be here, not necessarily neatly, but it's here. $200 is the minimum volume, but everyone just works at 200. Sorry, there's no ejector on there. I get the cheap ones so people won't walk home with them. Okay, so that plate is going to fit into this tray. Pick up the green part, and oh, someone left one in here. That's how they go in. With A1 in the upper left-hand corner, you have to put this underneath that little tab. When you're working with a robot, everything has to be in exactly the right place. It's very fussy about that. Okay, now you can put the green rack back on. The arched part goes down at the other end. Flip it 180, there you go. Okay, now are you going to be using streptavidin tips?
Yeah.
Okay, so those live in that carton. Everybody mostly uses streptavidin tips. We buy them in bulk. The tips live in these special envelopes so they can be dark and dry and room temperature. That's what makes them happy. So the Mylar keeps it dark. When you unzip that, you'll see there's a little desiccant pack in there. You can go ahead and open this up. Other end, the zip, there you go. There's the desiccant pack. And in the afternoon, I keep the sun off them by keeping the windows shut. Okay, so flip that up and you'll open up this, it's kind of hinged. This is how they sell them to us in these 96 well trays. What you want to do is take 4 tips and move them either by hand or with forceps and put them in the first 4 wells of column 1. And just don't bonk the end of the tip. People say this reminds them of the game Operation. Okay, great. Now if you could close up that package, it hinges on the back and snaps on the front and it makes a really loud noise. Excellent. So you put the desiccant pack, put it back inside its envelope to make it happy. Great, thanks. Yeah, you'll notice that one of them says opened on such and such a date. That's the one everyone works from until it's empty. Now this guy we can park in here to keep it out of the dust. Do you want to open up the lid? And you put this with the arched part, matching that arched part, and there's little holes that will grab the feet of this plate. There's only one way it can be perfect, and that's where the robot expects to find it. Yeah, just to keep the dust out, and we'll take a time point here, so anytime after 2 we can start your experiment. Now we're going to set up the experiment plate. Classic setup for a kinetics experiment is first you have a column of buffer. We're going to get a buffer baseline. Then you have your column with your ligand in it. And then you have a column with your analyte or sample in it. That thing's going to bind to your ligand. They change the vocabulary here and there. I'll try to keep it consistent for you. But anyway, so what you'll need to do is, maybe you should make a plate map, or unless you can keep this straight. Yeah, 4 with just buffer, and only 3 of these are going to have ligand, and only 3 of these are going to have analyte. Okay. 1 for the ligand only reference tip, and 1 for the analyte only reference tip. So now you can put 200 microliters of all of those guys in. So now it's time to put this plate on that blue platform, which is at an angle. You want A1 to be up in this corner and be right inside those 2 clips. They're going to hold it when it rotates at 1,000 RPM. It has to be clipped down good and tight. Perfect. And so that needs 5 minutes. Okay. Since this is an optical technique, if someone came along in the middle of your experiment and opened this up, they would ruin it. And there's no locking mechanism on here. So we just do this to make sure nobody comes along in the middle of your experiment and ruins it. Okay. So now we can move down to the computer. So if you're the first one of the day, Joseph, this will be turned off. This is not online, by the way. We take everything off of the flash drive. So it is off, so here's the on button. Doesn't look like much. Why don't you press that, turn on the computer. All right. Before we start, we want to make a data folder for you. Everyone has a personal folder in that Forte Bio folder. You can come a little closer if it's easier to reach. Let's just make a new folder. There might be a Wittrup folder, I don't even know. But you can have one that's just the Joseph folder. Okay, now we know what it's called. You can just close that. We don't need that anymore. There are 2 softwares here. One is the data acquisition software, and one is the data analysis software. They both use the same resources, so you can't run them together, or they crash each other out. The robot takes a minute to initialize. You hear it making all these little spaceship noises and stuff, and we don't interrupt that. Someone tried that, didn't work. So we'll just have to wait. It's only 60 seconds, but we're waiting to see the word ready show up down there. Now it says ready. Okay, good. So now there's 2 basic types of experiments, quantitation and kinetics. You're doing kinetics. So click on that green button. And here come several panels. This is the plate definition window. So what you need to do is tell the computer what's in which wells. So when you have all 8 you can just click the one at the top and fill it all in. If you right-click on A1, I'll just do them one at a time. Right-click on it, choose buffer, because I think that's what you got.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just do that 3 times more, sorry. Or maybe we can get clever and do all 4 at once. Oh, except the next ones are going to be different. Okay, so 2A, right-click, this is what they call load. Load and ligand both start with L. That's how I remember it. Would be nice to have consistent vocabulary, like we said. Anyway, and so that one is also ligand. Is that one the one that's buffer?
The last one is buffer.
Oh, okay. This is where those maps really come in handy. Double check, yeah. It is not uncommon for people to have their map right here. Okay, and then the third column is your sample. Right-click. It actually is called sample here, even though they refer to it as analyte in other places. And so that one is what B3 is also sample, but then C3 is the buffer one, and then that's another sample. Okay. In the future, when you're doing a full experiment and you want this guy to calculate a KD for you, you need at least 4 concentrations, you put the molar concentration over here. And then it uses that later when it's calculating stuff. If you forget, you can put it in later, but that won't really be relevant today. It's just 2 tips. Okay, so now we have defined the plate. We know what's in it. And move to tab 2, which is assay definition. Okay, this is where we tell it where to go, what to do, how long to stay there. Everybody starts with a baseline of 60 seconds. So they just put that in there because that's just required. So we have what the step is, but we need the location. So if you click on the 1 on top of column 1, that will highlight that whole column. That's our location, and this is our step. So we actually build the assay down here. So double click on that little arrow, and now the first step is there. Okay. The next thing we want it to do is go dip into your ligand, right? Mm-hmm. So highlight column 2, that's our location, and then we can add a step here. And this step will be called loading. The last person did it for 300 seconds. We don't know how long it's going to take for your stuff. We're going to watch. This is the step that we're going to watch and make sure things are linear. And we want to get to a y-axis position between 1 and 2 nanometers. That's just the ballpark to start with. And we'll see what happens. And if that's done before 300 seconds, we can just stop and move on. The software is great. If you need more time, you can add more time. If you're finished and you want to move along, you can do it in real time. You can just make decisions as you see things come up. Okay, so now that's our next step, so say okay. And now double click on that little arrow to put it downstairs. Okay. The third thing you want to do is go back to column 1 to rinse off the excess ligand. So add a step. You're going to call this baseline, another baseline, and 60 seconds is fine. So say okay, and now it says you already have a baseline. Do you want a baseline too? Everybody has a baseline too, no problem. Say okay. And now double click and move that one down, okay? And now, ta-ta, over to column 3, where the action should happen, and add a step. We're gonna call this association. And 600 seconds, I have no idea. That's probably way too long. But having it be too long is better than having it be too short. So when we see that things have associated and it's saturated for a while, then we can just make it move along to the next step, okay? So you can say okay, and then move that downstairs. And then now back to column 1 where the buffer is. And this step that we're gonna add is called dissociation. You like to give it a good long time to dissociate. The rule of thumb that Forte Bio told us about was you want your signal to decrease by 5% to get a really good KD. So you want to give it as much time as it needs. Okay, so say okay. And now move that one downstairs. All right, and that's saying this whole assay is going to take a half hour. If we let everything run all the way out, it will, but we might cut things off early.
Right.
After you've done this a few times, Joseph, you will know how long it takes your loading. And for your association, you can totally change those time limits. Okay, so now we know, oh, and you are using streptavidin, that's just handy. Most people do. Now, go over to sensor assignment. Okay, now we see here's the plate. It knows that you have liquid in those 3 columns, and it assumes you have 8 tips. This is an incorrect assumption. We will fix that. Before we make any changes, this is the most confusing panel in the whole software. Before we do anything, uncheck that. It assumes you're going to save these tips and regenerate them for future use. Nobody has done that yet in 4 years, okay? Not likely it's going to happen today, right? So, oh yeah, and it always warns you that dire things will happen if you do that. And it's wrong. Just say okay. Now, it still thinks you have 8 tips here. So what you want to do is highlight E through H there and then click remove. More easily said than done, huh? But you can do them one at a time if worse comes to worse. Okay, now say remove. Okay, good. Now it knows there's only 4 tips. If you leave that thinking it has 8 tips and it doesn't feel them, it flips out and gives you error messages. Okay. All right, so now we have our sensors assigned in the right place. Now go to review experiment. We get to walk through this to make sure we did things right. So it's highlighting column 1 and step 1. To go to the next step, click that tiny black arrow. There's step 2, okay. And then click it again, step 3. That's right, we want it to go back and wash off. Step 3 for association, 4 for dissociation. Okay, we did it right, yay. So now you can go to the Run Experiment tab. First thing you need to do is go searching for your folder. It's on the desktop Forte Bio folder. Okay, that's all we need to do. Select that folder. And now name your experiment something. They say, name it something you'll remember in 3 months what you were doing. Good luck. Okay, and that will be the name of a subfolder inside your folder. And the only other thing we need to do here is take off the 10 minutes. That is built in to
The delayed start.
Delayed start. We have taken care of that. Your tips have been in there for 20 minutes. The plate has been on the heated stage for 10 minutes. Everybody's good. So, to get things going, click go, and we get to watch the show. It shows you each tip will be in a different color, so you can track individuals, how they're behaving. The column where it's going to be working is always highlighted in green. This is where we're going to watch the loading happening. It's measuring optical thickness, but first, you can just hear the agitation of the rotating plate. And we're going to see 60 seconds of baseline. 4 different colors. They're all running together. It looks really noisy because you're really high resolution. You're down, you're down close to it. This is the size of your current step. This is the size of the entire experiment. If you see that you're going to be needing more time, if something looks like it's not got enough time, the last 5 seconds of that are locked out. So if you think you might need more time, do it before it gets to the end and click Extend Current Step, and it automatically gives you a minute, or you can choose more. Okay. But this looks good. They're all running together. So here is some typical Octet data. The first 60 seconds of the baseline are nice and flat. And this is the loading step where the ligand is attaching to the end of the sensor tip. And you want ideally to have your tip loaded to between 1 and 2 nanometers. And this is great. And now baseline 2 is the next step where excess ligand is washed off of the tip. And this is the association step. You can see that the different colors represent different concentrations of the same analyte or sample. And the higher concentration solution is getting close to saturation more quickly than the lower concentrations. And we typically let this step go to saturation, and it looks like this user decided that this is pretty saturated at this point. So the very last step is called dissociation, where the sensor tip goes back into buffer and the molecules that have bound onto the tip are now leaving. This is measuring the off rate of binding. This is the on rate and this is the off rate. And Forte Bio told us that you want to leave your dissociation step long enough so that the signal decreases by 5% if you want to get an accurate KD measurement. So there is the raw data. End of story for now. So now the experiment is finished. Over here, there's a little protocol of what to do after your Octet run. So the first thing is to empty the tips into the jar. We heard that little clinking sound when it threw the tips into, there's a trash tray. If you press on that panel, a little drawer pops out. So pull it out. Oh, somebody else didn't empty the trash tray. Those are not all yours. You only used 4. Okay, anyway, these are, since they're fiber optics, they're glass, they have to go into the glass and metal waste. And you can just pop that drawer back in. Now you can take off this lock mechanism and take out your experiment plate.
This one first?
Yeah. You can recover the material from the plate if you want to. Some people have stuff that's so precious they need to save it. Is this all expendable?
Yeah.
Okay, what you can do is flick the liquid into the sink.
Okay.
And then what we do is we put tape over the columns we've used, and I can give you plate sealing film to cover the rest so that you don't get dust in here, and you can use the rest of the plate to reduce plastic waste. All right, if you flick the liquid into the sink. And some people put tape over the columns they've already used so they don't accidentally reuse them. I suspect there would be buffer crystals dried in there, but this ensures that you're not going to reuse the same wells. Okay, and then if you want to put a piece of plate sealing film over the top, then that'll keep the rest of the wells good and clean. And you can use this for your next experiment. Okay. You can also recover the plate that's in the empty tip tray. And do the same thing. You can flick the buffer out and mark that and use the rest of the plate for another experiment, another day. And then the next thing is to put the empty tip tray back into the drawer, where you always keep some there for the pre-wetting step. And the last thing you have to do is sign the logbook for everyone to sign in.